Good evening, everybody. I'm Audrey Sinclair, and I'm a beekeeper, and I live at Badicaul, just outside Skye and Lochalsh. I moved up here in 1994, and then within 2 years, a friend of a friend was visiting and came out with a statement, "Oh, this would be a nice place to," and I didn't really know what he was going to end up saying, but what he said was, "This would be a good place to keep bees." And I just thought, well, you know, I'll be polite and say yes, knowing nothing about them at all or anything. I hadn't realised he was such an expert on the matter. I should say he lived down in Fife. But anyway, he set about getting me organised with bees and equipment. I had to buy my own suit, but everything else he managed to get second hand and things for me. So in 1996, I started keeping bees, and over the years, I've managed, I wouldn't say I've been keeping the same strain of bees, but I've added to them from other people that have been leaving the area and mixing together and so on. And so I'm still going. At the moment, last year, I would say was the worst year I'd ever had in terms of that. And I ended up in the springtime of this year with just a pickle of very few bees that were not surviving, but I have managed to acquire by various means 1 or 2 colonies, so I'm building up. So I'm sitting with 4 hives at the moment with bees in them all. They've not all got queens, but I should be in a situation to go into the winter in a reasonable state of affairs. Now I know we've got a mixture of folk. Some of you have I have some bees. I was basing that today would be, or this evening would be based really for really starting from the beginning and just talking about what we're bees themselves. And when I talk about bees, I'm meaning honeybees, not the bumblebees. The bumblebees are very common this year, as they have been the last couple of years as well. In our area, you keep hearing on news that the bumblebees are going down, but definitely in my garden they're thriving well. So I think if they're thriving, if the bumblebees are thriving, the honeybees should thrive as well. The slide's really not so much to bore you with it, but it's more just to keep me on track, because once I do start talking, I just tend to drift off onto various things and so on. So there's a typical honeybee. You know, a bit more a shape of a wasp, but not quite so wasp-waisted, not so much narrow in the middle there. Various colours. I prefer the dark bees, the black bees, but you can get some, you'll see some of the other photographs as they come along that might have some more lighter colours with slightly oranges in them and so on. But that is what I'm talking about in terms of today. Bumblebees tend to live more solitary lives than honeybees. Honeybees have live as a colony, and as such, it's more efficient. So see, at this time of night, if you hear the buzzing of bees, they're more likely to be bumblebees who've got to work longer hours than honeybees. The honeybees can go back to their hives much earlier, and of course they've got work to do in the hives before they bed down for the night. But it's a good example of working together is a more efficient way of doing it. And the next one is I've done various talks to beginners, beekeepers, at least one is here tonight, and I often start with the 3 basic rules of beekeeping, that you will get stung. And when you see the top picture there, if you can, it shows the sting going into a finger there. The bee, when she stings, and I say a she because it's only the female bees that sting, the male bees don't. So she will then die, and if you're wearing some protection, a sting's not too bad. It's more painful if you get it directly onto the skin itself, because the barb can work its way in, and it can be painful. But they say it's good for arthritis as well, but I don't actually try it out to find out myself. And the other thing, if you are interested in keeping bees, is actually to learn from your mistakes. And mistakes you will make, everybody makes mistakes. And if you learn from them, you'll make you a better beekeeper, and you'll keep your bees And that's the aim of beekeepers, is to keep their bees rather than the bees going away on themselves. And then the last one is, and that's showing by the photograph at the bottom there, is my stepdaughter, and she was taking photographs of me, and she was, when I was working with the bees, and she got very worried about that bee that was just in front of her face, but luckily it was on the outside of her veil. If you can see the back of a bee when you look down at it, it's a sign it's actually in your veil, and the legs are on the veil. So that's something to watch out for. It's not very pleasant to get stung in the head, which often it does. Well, you can get stung in the head if they get into the suit, because they're just anxious to get back out again. And I just hate when they get tangled up in my hair. So, and number 3 is a site of 3 hives. This is where I've got my bees at the moment. The rhododendron are a curse with me in my garden, but at least they create a bit of shelter and wind protection. And I have cut back since that photograph was taken, because when I first sighted them there was a good couple of feet or so behind the hives, but it just keeps growing. So each year I've got to have it get in and tackle it in terms of that. So that's what the hive is looking like in terms of that. To keep bees, or to understand how, when you're working with hives, is to understand what's going on inside the hive, and you work with the bees. The bees will do all the work, but you've got to understand what's going on with them. And within a hive, there is normally 1 queen. Every now and again, there's rare occasions you can actually get 2 queens surviving together that might live in different parts of the hive, but the vast majority of colonies will only have the 1 queen, and the rest are made up. The majority of the bees are the workers, and they're the females. And in the summer, there are, and I should say probably there could be 10,000, 20,000 upwards of workers in 1 hive during the summer months. When it comes into winter time, the numbers dwindle down, but you need at least 5 to 10,000 for that colony to overwinter. The drones are the males, and they, I can say it because nobody else is going to shout me down, they have a very, I always think of a lazy life in terms of that. They don't do anything apart from being fed. They don't even go to the honey stores themselves. They are fed, and their sole reason of being around is to be, in case there's going to be a virgin queen going to emerge somewhere in the area, and they go out to mate with the virgin queen. If they do mate, that's the end of their life, because their internal workings all come out at the same time as at the mating, so they then die. If they don't actually need to go out to mate, come September, October, they get pushed out of the hive, and you can see a whole load of drones sitting out. It's a sign that winter is coming upon us, and the bees are getting ready for the winter. And what will then happen is the next year there'll be a new set of drones laid. So the drones have, they've got I don't know if it's an ideal life or not, but they don't have to do much work in comparison to the workers or even the queen, but they're there. It's essential that they're there, but they're only going to last a year anyway, and then they're out of it. You'll see that they're a bit fatter, and good deal thicker in body all the way, and the main way to tell them is at the back end there. It's much rounded, whereas the worker has got more of a pointed end to it, and you see that worker's got some more distinct stripes on it. It just depends what strain it is as to what the colouring of the worker is in terms of that, but that's it's quite easy to tell the difference between the drone and the worker. And then the next slide will show the other bee that's in a hive, and that's a queen. Now, that queen's nice and easy to see because she's got a big yellow splub on her. It is quite handy to have a mark on the queen, because at times you've got to know, you find the queen and I'll come back to that later on. I tend to just use white mark when I'm putting it on, and it's a sign I can tell if the marked queen is in the hive there. I can see that's the same queen I'd seen the last time I'd been in, and so on. But if I find a queen that's not got any marking on it, it's a sign it's a new queen that's come along. And that's no harm, but at least it keeps you in track as to which is the queen and which isn't. So the queen, basically, her role is to lay eggs. She's just an egg laying machine. She can lay hundreds of eggs a day, and the workers, they're the ones that do the running of the hive. They do all the tasks about the place from as soon as they hatch out, they become they work as sort of housemaids, cleaning out the cells. Then they go down to putting food into the cells, and then they progress to actually feeding the larvae, and that then after fortnight, 3 weeks, they progress further and they become foragers, and they do the flying. So it's when you see bees out or honeybees out on the flowers, it's the worker bees you're seeing, and they are out for the flowers to get the nectar, which is the sugar solution that they turn into honey, or pollen, which they take back to feed the grubs, and that's what their job is. So workers will live for about 6 weeks. I often think, because we've got such long days in the summer and really good hot days and things, I think they might even only live for about 5 weeks, because they literally just wear themselves out with all the flying they're doing. The queen can live up to about 3 or 4 years. But as she starts to go off the lay, as she gets older, she'll lay less eggs. And she gives off an aroma, a pheromone, which keeps the colony united. And when she gets older, that scent gradually disappears. And what the bees can do is they can supersede her. They can get rid of her and create a new queen, and that's a natural thing that goes on. And that's why it's quite useful to mark the queen. So, because if a supersedes her, if you get a new queen, it's handy to know how old. It's always handy to know how old your queen is at that point in time. So that's the three types of bees that are in there. And the next slide shows just the other thing, apart from knowing to recognize the bees. The other important piece of information to know is the life cycle of each of the 3 bees, because this is important when you've got the eggs and the larva and the brood, and I'll come to brood in a minute or two, but it's important that you know what's going on. When an egg is laid, that's counted as day 1, and you'll see on the right hand column, that's a queen's cell. Sorry, yes, that wasn't a very clear picture at all, but that's good, Karen, there, yes. So it takes 16 days for a queen to hatch out from an egg to emerging. You'd have think the queen being more important, it would take longer for her, but she is fed by specially enriched food called royal jelly, so she develops a lot quicker. The worker takes about 21 days, and it's useful to know when the capping and uncapping is, and likewise with the drone takes longer and takes 23 days. He's just that little bit lazier and slower at moving, in terms of that. So, and these dates you fix in your mind so that when you're doing a hive inspection, if you're seeing capped or uncapped brood, particularly if you've got a queen emerging, to keep track of what's happening with that. When I was talking about brood and things, inside the hive there will be frames like this, and what you're seeing there in yellow is sealed worker brood with a few bees wandering around it. Now normally when you've got that in a hive, it could be this whole frame is totally covered in bees, and it's difficult to see. It's to see what's underneath. But that's a very, very good frame, totally covered with bees, covered with worker brood. If I turn it the other side, what we've got here is worker brood, which is the flatter stuff, but this thicker bits here are actually drones. So there's a big group of drones just about to emerge from there. So the idea is to look to check that there is brood when you're going into hive. There's eggs. It's a sign that there's a queen. If you can see the queen, Claire was just saying she saw her queen today. I mean, I was in my hives today. I didn't see the queen, but I could see eggs, so I was happy enough that she's there. It's somewhere or other. But that's what a typical frame is in terms of that. A hive is made up of the bottom box, which contained the frames, 10 or 11 frames, such as I had in my hand a second ago there, is in the brood box. You normally put a queen excluder on top to keep the queen down in the brood box. And then you can put supers on, which have frames the same length, but they're shallower. And that's where the bees put the honey. And that's really one of the reasons that most of us keep bees, is to get some sort of honey supply at the end of the year on the matter. So it's basically just a series of either square or rectangular boxes stacked on top of each other. And you just lift them off and put them back together again and so on. So it's fine. You might have noticed on this slide I had of the 3 hives. I work 2 types of hives. One is called the National, which is a square one, and the other one's a WBC. That's the one that's got the sloping sides to it. Thank you very much. So that's definitely the one on the right hand side is a WBC, and the next one down is a National. And I can't quite make out that other one. I think that's a WBC as well. Basically, the WBCs have got a double wall in it. That sloping outer lifts are just, well, quite a few people prefer them because they look better. They also give better protection in the winter. They are more difficult for moving around, and the only difference, they'll both take the same frames, which is very good. But the WBC will take one less frame than the National. National's got a more square, whereas WBC's slightly rectangular. So you frames are fine, but it's just when you're taking the other bits and pieces and you take a bit down, you find it's not quite there. It's not quite the same one, and you have to move back again. But anyway, I have my bees not too far away from the house. I think if you have your colonies further away, you have to be more organized than I am, but it works out okay in terms of that. So there's one of my WBCs. That's taken a long time ago, because that was on my original site, which I've not used for about 15 years or so. And when it's sitting all together, it's as it is on the top picture there. And then you take the roof off and some of the lifts. And then by the time you're taking all your bits and pieces, and then you got your toolbox and your smoker and so on, you need a bit of space round about it. It just shows how, you do spread. I have been to people's, luckily most of mine are relatively flat areas. I've been to some that's almost like a mountaineering challenge to get there, and then you're sort of perched precariously to try, and there's not enough space to put things down on. So, it's complicated. Well, it's stressful enough at times, so why make life more difficult? So inside a hive, we'll go to the next one, it'll show us what happens. I would say in the summertime, I tend to, ideally you're meant to look once a week. Basically, you're checking that everything is working fine inside the hive. And the one thing you're looking for in the summer months is that you don't have any signs of that they're going to start swarming. There's no need to panic if you do get signs, because you can do corrective measures, and I'll talk about that in a minute or two. So when you actually go into the hive, that's a WBC. So I would take the roof off and then the lifts off. Now that was a few years ago, because I don't know why I started putting the lifts, you know, sort of diagonally with each other. They stack on top of each other, which makes them more stable. So if you watch me doing it now, you'd see that I was actually doing it slightly differently. On top there is a wooden a piece of wood that's called the crown board, and that's me just lifting it off on the bottom on the right hand picture there, and you'll see that there's bees in there. Now what you're seeing there is underneath that crown board is a super, and under that will be the queen excluder with the brood box down the bottom there. So we can go on to the next one, and here I've just taken that crown board off and we're looking into that super. I'll have taken the super off, and then what's lying underneath that is the queen excluder, and that you can either get sort of a mesh arrangement or a wire arrangement, and what that does is the gap is large enough to let the workers come through, but it keeps the queen down in the brood box. There's some people don't use queen excluders, but if the queen gets up into the supers, she'll start laying eggs in there as well, and then that can contaminate, particularly if you're looking to take honey off. It's better to keep her down in there, and she's, as long as there's plenty of room down there, there's no harm in her being there. So then you take the queen excluder off, and then we've got the frames of I think there'll be about 10 in that one, similar to the one I was holding in my hand there, and then I would have a look through it. And basically, and we'll go to the next one. There we have me looking at one there, and I can see brood on there. I think I'm even seeing a queen cell in there as well. I'll show you another queen cell in a minute. Basically, I'm looking when I do an inspection to check that there are eggs. Now the eggs look like tiny little white grains of rice, and they're laid into the cells, and you can see the cells they're more or less hexagonal, and they cover the whole frame altogether there. And the queen will spend her time moving around from frame to frame, laying her eggs. The bees will feed the eggs, and they'll turn the eggs into little larvae, which will grow. And then when they've filled the cells big enough, they will then cap it over after 8 days. And then what happens underneath that, cap it with wax. And what happens underneath that is the metamorphosis, you know, the same effect as a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. You get this white, yucky sort of grub, sort of little maggot type thing, and what emerges is a bee, and they eat their way out. The bee itself eats its way out. It's not from the inside, you know, it's not the ones outside preparing it. When the bee has developed, it will then eat its way out. So there's a reasonable number of bees on there. I was pleased to see some drone there. I would be looking to see there's eggs. If there's eggs, as I said before there, you don't always see the queen, because sometimes it's more difficult to see her, you know, where you've got a whole load. She is not that much bigger than, say, a worker, definitely width-wise. Lengthwise, she's definitely got a longer back to her, but it's more the way she moves. Some people are better at identifying a queen as not. I find it difficult to see one, and they do like to scurry, well, they do like to get away and hide. They're relatively shy. So, but I'm not over worried if I don't see the queen. As long as I'm seeing eggs, I know that there's been a queen in there in the last 2 or 3 days, and there's no reason why she shouldn't still be there if she was there 3 days before. So that's a typical frame in there. And the next one, it shows, again, that's very similar to what the one I was holding up there. And there we see the 2 different types of brood. The top one is the worker brood, and you can see how regular and so on those cells are, hexagonal because they're strong. If they were square, they could be squashed. If you put, you know, if you take a square box, and you put, well, not a square box, but a square piece of paper, and you push it, you can bend it over and it becomes, you know, distorts. Whereas a hexagon is much stronger. The bees have got a lot of science knowledge. The ones
Can I
down.
ask, Audrey, sorry,
Yes.
when you're talking about the hexagon, so do the bees make that themselves in the frames, or is that something you put in and they?
You put it in as again. Can you go back? Can you come out of the presentation again? So what I'm holding here is a super frame, and it's ready to go into the hive, and it's got wax in here. Now the wax has been pressed in the hexagonal shape there, and when that goes into the hive, the bees will draw that wax out. The bees can make wax themselves, and what they will do is they will keep that pattern and draw it out to make the cells. If you didn't have a frame and you left gaps in the hive, the bees will actually make their own wax, but they will stick with hexagons. So even if they didn't have that as a guide, if they just had an open space, and they don't like spaces, they will try to fill that, whatever they've got in there. They will, it will be hexagons they work with. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I just, bees are totally new to me, so this is really interesting for me.
And I mean, the other thing is, and again, I mean, what we've done with this is we've just made use, or what beekeepers do is just make use of the information they've learned from the bees. But you see, it's pressed on both sides because they will draw both sides out. Now, it's difficult to show you here, but it would be better if I was at present. But if you can imagine the hexagons on one side, they don't line up exactly on the other side. What is the corner of a hexagon on one side is the middle of the hexagon on the other side. And the bees do that themselves. Again, man has copied the bees to make this, and what it means is it's a stronger shape again. So they're, as I say, they have a lot of they've got a lot of science in their minds in terms of that. So that's what they have there, and I'll show you some drawn stuff later on. But that's a super there. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
So and it's good to see some drones, but you don't want too many drones because all they'll do is eat all the food. So, and if you do every now and again get a drone laying queen, the only thing you can do is kill her and get a new queen in, or get, you know, because as I say, you don't want all drones because there's no advantage to that at all. Up to a couple of hundreds about your best. So those are the brood, seal brood, ready. You know what's going on. The process of change is happening in each of those. And I've never done a count, and I must actually keep the information in my head, but you know, there'll be a good 1,000 cells on each side of a frame. So, you know, it's a good number. Now the next slide shows something slightly different. And what we've got here is like little cups, or they're often likened to peanuts as well. These are queen cells. Totally different. So what happens is if they decide either they want a new queen or they want to swarm, they will make themselves some queen cells. And the old queen will lay eggs in there. Now, to my mind, they are still the same eggs, but because they're being fed the royal jelly, they develop as queen cells. And in theory, the first of these that hatches out will be the queen, and if that works fine, if the bees are happy with her, they will knock the other queen cells down. They tend to leave these, they tend to do several queen cells, almost like a belt and brace arrangement. So they don't leave it all just to the one in case something happens to her. And when you're doing an inspection, you're looking to see if there's any queen cells. particularly early in the year. Now we're at this time, I wouldn't expect to see any because the bees themselves know there's not enough time to mate a new queen. So they will, but definitely May, June is the time to be looking for queen cells. And that's why you've got to be looking every 7 days. And of course, our weather's not conducive to checking every 7 days. So sometimes you can, if it's a fortnight before you get in, and then you find that queen cells have developed and hatched out. You remember I said 16 days, it takes 16 days for it. So if one of these then hatched out, if it's an old queen, the old queen will get, she'll just die out, or they'll get rid of her and the new queen will take over her place. But if they decide that they actually want to swarm, that's why the queen cells appear. And the fact that there's 3 together like that, it would be to my indication is that they're about to swarm there. They're beginning to think of swarming. Swarming is not a good thing for us beekeepers, because when the bees do swarm, what happens is the old queen with about half the bees will, half the bees will gorge themselves on any honey supplies they've got in the hive, and then they will take off with the old queen. And they take in all that food before they go off, because that will give them enough for the next 2 or 3 days, because they will be busy enough trying to make themselves a new home somewhere else, so they won't need to worry about going out to feed themselves. So they stock up before they go off. It's a natural way of colonies reproducing. Bees reproduce within the colonies, but single honeybees won't survive. They've got to survive as colonies. So it is a natural way for the colonies to keep reproducing, for this swarming to take place. Reasons for swarming: they've either not got enough food, so they want to go off somewhere else to look for something better. They've got too much food around in the area, and they make the decision that, oh, there's enough food here, it will sustain 2 colonies as opposed to 1. There's not enough space. They're looking to dilute or expand elsewhere. Or it might even be they've just got it in their genes. And quite a few people get their bees as swarms, so it's almost as if that's part of the system. You know, it's in their DNA that they will do that. But when you're working with the bees, is to check whether you're seeing any of this signs, like the queen cells, and you can convince them that they have swarmed. You can do bits of manipulation, and I'm not going to go into that tonight, but you can convince them that they have actually done it. And you're splitting the hive into 2, and it's as if they've done this swarm on their own. So you try to fool them, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but usually it can be successful. So checking the bees, when you go in to check the bees, one thing is to check that they've got enough food. When you'd think in the summer, oh, there's plenty of, they're out and flying about. They often talk about a June gap. This year it was July with us, and last July was horrendous. It was just, they almost thought they were starting off the winter. They were putting the drones out in July last year, as if, you know, they were closing up. And then weather got better again, and the queen started laying again, and so on. But you've got to check they've got enough supplies. You also check that there's not too many bees for the hive. You can put more than 1 super on, and that helps spread it out a bit. And the other thing is you're checking for the queen cells, that they're to see, and if there is, and it's no bad thing to get them, because you can then multiply. I know within, you know, Skye and Lochalsh, we've got a number of beekeepers who are still looking for bees. So it's a natural way of actually getting new colonies going. when you do some of the, well, there's two main ways of doing an artificial swarm. The one that I'd always done before up to this year, the instructions said, first find the queen. Now, if we go to the next slide, now that queen's nice and easy. See, there's not too many bees on that slide, and she's got a nice white spot on her. So, I mean, that's one of the advantages, as I said before, about you've got an idea of whether she's your queen or, you know, the one that you marked, or if she hadn't a spot on her, she's not. But it's also easier to actually find her. Whereas the next one is a more standard way, and that one I had earlier on, you know, way back with when I was holding the frame. Now there is a queen in there, and I don't think it's a particularly good enough quality of picture for you to see her, but she, you know, and they're nice dark bees. But that's often the way of it, to actually get an idea of reality of what it looks like. I think she is about 2/3 of the way down, and about keep coming left a little bit, Karen, and a wee bit more, and a wee bit more, and a wee bit more, and I think you're on her there. You've just passed her. Can you see that longer body there? That bit there, yeah, I think that's the queen there, and she's not marked. So you know, it's a good idea to mark her. So that's the queen, right? And then still in the inspection, okay, yeah, that's fine, we can go to the next one. Here we have a super. Now that one I showed you, would, you know, had in my hand here was one that will go into hive. This is what it turns into. I've got a couple of frames like that here, so I'll show you them after the presentation, or after the slideshow rather. So this is a super. The length of the frames are the same, but they're shallower, and that has honey in it. The workers will go out to whatever flowers that are around on the particular day and collect the nectar. They have various enzymes in their body that begin to turn it into honey, and then they'll take it back to the hive and give it to some of the workers inside the hive, the non-flying workers, who will then put it into the cells, each of these cells. And then they'll reduce the water content. The nectar's got, I think, got around about 30% water in it. Now, at that level of water, it doesn't keep. The one thing about honey is once it's sealed and capped, it can keep indefinitely. They say they took honey from some of the pyramids. I don't know if they actually tasted it, but they could still smell of honey. I mean, I've got honey going back to about 2000 or 1998 or something like that. So it looks a bit dark now, but it's not gone off. It's not gone moldy or anything. So what the bees do is they fan with their wings, as a whole group of them, and there's nothing better in a summer's evening just to hear all this fanning going on in a hive, and they reduce the water content in each of these cells. And then when the water content gets down below 20%, 17, 18%, they will put wax over the top. Now, how they know when the water content down is 20%, I do not know. The only way we can tell that is to use hydrometers or spectrometers or various other things to test it with instruments, but they seem to know, and they then put the wax on it. Put the wax over it. They cap each of the cells, and that then happens. Now this week I've taken about 3 frames off, just to be a little bit greedy, also to show you what they look like. The idea is to try and get as much of the frame capped as possible. They reckon you should get at least 80% capping, because if you have less than that, the honey will still taste the same, but it won't keep. It could start fermenting. I was a wee bit greedy last year because I had so little, and one jar did start bubbling a little bit, oozing out, but that's a typical honey there. Okay. So that's a good point. That's a good thing of beekeeping. One of the bad things is if you manage to miss the queen cells because it's been bad weather or whatever else it is, it's quite an unusual, well, it's quite strange experience, not unusual, a strange experience to look up in the sky and just see it. And that top picture is not just a grainy picture, that is just thousands of bees in the air at one time. And they have a distinctive noise. I can remember a good few years, about 10 years ago, I'm thinking, what's that noise? And I looked out the window, I've got these sort of patio windows at the front here, and the air was just full like that. I could have taken that picture myself. So by the time I had got into my suit and gone out, there wasn't a single one in the air. And then it was a case of wandering around the garden and listening. And I was lucky enough that they had settled into one of the bushes, and I could just hear the buzz of them there. So similar to the next picture there, they've settled into there. So what you can do, that is the ideal situation, is then to remove that. If it's in a bush, you can chop the bush off, you know, the branch, put it in a box, keep it in the box for till the evening, and then I'll show you in the next slide or so after this one, but I'll talk about it, but we'll see what happens. It goes into a box. So it's good if it's close enough. I've got some fir trees round about me, and they have been higher up than, but I've used a long pole to bang it with boxes or sheets of cotton sheets, you know, bed sheets lying on the ground to knock them down into that. What will happen is the queen will be in there with that hole. Can you make out it's a bit dark, but yes, that's a whole swarm there. So I mean, that's an ideal one. He's able just to cut that and put it into the box down the bottom there. I haven't been up a ladder myself, but I have footed a ladder for somebody who was up a tall tree and out a branch, and it gets a wee bit nerve-wracking. If we do get swarms, we do have on our website contact numbers for folk who will advise on swarms. If you get a swarm in the chimney, it's a bit difficult to get out. I think there's one in the south end of Skye at the moment, but it's in a middle chimney halfway, which is almost impossible to get out. So I think they're just going to have to leave it there. They have been known to go into openings. I have been to one that was going into the cavity of a wall beside a window. And when I said to the lady of the house, no, they're going in, you know, they're going in, she said, no, they're not in the house. But true enough, they weren't getting into the house, they were in the cavity. Now, the only way you can get them out of there, and I have seen a video of somebody doing that, is actually to drill the bricks out and extract it that way. The gentleman of the house said that wasn't to happen, so we left it as it was there. But it is a pity when you do lose a swarm into irretrievable places. We had the one over in Bradford at the Hebridean Hotel. They were up in the loft there, but normally a loft wouldn't be too bad if you could crawl into and get it out. But if you can think of what the Hebridean Hotel's like, it's had its roof lifted, or the windows have gone up a bit. You know, the roof has gone, instead of being sloping, the slope has got much less. And so it was too narrow a spot. But anyway, I think they made off themselves. But it was a bit of an interest as people were watching these bees coming and going. So it does make life interesting when you get these calls to say that, can you get rid of my bees?
Audrey, there's a question from Angela asking, why don't the bees fly away when you try and knock them down during the swarm?
What they do is when they leave the hive in the first place, they will go. Sorry, and I missed that bit out. What they do is they go off and usually go not very far from the hive, maybe up to about 10 yards away, and settle there. And what happens from there is a few scouts will go off to investigate where they're then going to go on to. You'd think they'd all have all this organised before they left the hive, but apparently not. So what they're doing is having a rest there, waiting for the next set of instructions to come along. So if you can catch them at that point, you're fine. If you miss it at this point, I have seen them go up the hillside and just had to let them go because they were moving faster than I could go through the heather and things. And it was, you know, in the hot day when the roads get very warm and there's that shimmer above the roads. Well, the air with the bees floating up the hillside was very much like that. So that's the ideal time. So they are there resting before, and because the queen's in there, they'll stay with the queen. So if you can get the queen there, and if you knock it, the ideal thing is to cut it and lower it gently into the box. But if you can't do it by arm, and you're doing it, as I say, from a height above there, you hope you're knocking the queen off down into the box or onto the sheet, and the other bees will keep with the queen. Okay, and then from then, once you've got your box, you then have a spare hive, and that's why it's always good to have a second hive ready. Well, not so much ready, but have a hive in the evening. And then what you do is you tip the bees onto a sheet of paper, a sheet in front on a long run up to it. You have a piece of wood. I have a piece of wood, I have a box, I have my sheet all ready just to take wherever I need it, sort of thing. And you tip them onto that. And it's fascinating watching them hive, because what happens is they're milling around and they're just moving in a general fashion there. And then the ones further up, they sense that there's this place, this dark place, and particularly if you've got some frames with some honey, that's just a bonus. They're thinking, gosh, here's a bit of shelter, there's a bit of food. And then the first little bees start to go in, and then it's almost a bit of telepathy takes place in the next lot. And instead of suddenly it all changes. Instead of it all just wandering around at different bits and pieces, they will all be moving in the same general direction, up and in. You can lift the lid off and just tip them all into the hive, but I always think doing it this way, they're in charge and they can order themselves, and it's all the better to see the queen going in as well. And she's not the first one in. It's usually the ones at the top there, and she might be a bit reluctant to go, but there'll be others behind her pushing her along to get her in. But it's an interesting experience to see. And it's good to see it, that one. And then that's a new hive ready to get going there. As I say, sometimes you catch the swarms, sometimes you don't, and it's just a bit of a luck really with that there. I put this one in terms of that. I mean, I've been talking about, I mean, I just got fascinated with bees just by the fact of they just have such a fascinating existence, and just how well they work together, and they're a challenge to keep at times, but they're fascinating, and the honey's very good to get off it. I put other products there because at other time, you know, propolis, which is the sticky stuff they use almost like glue to keep their hives together and things. So there's medicinal benefits of these things, but the one thing that bees are really important in the general thing is pollinators. They do reckon if there weren't any bees around, or honeybees around, I think our pollination of our plants would be greatly reduced. So whatever we can do for the pollination is good. I used to live down in Suffolk next to an orchard, and although I wasn't interested in bees at that point, I wish I had, because there was a guy brought hives in for the pollination of the apples, the apple trees each year, sort of thing. But it wasn't anybody that I knew. That it's not as if he kept them there all the time. So that's one way of actually making a living out of bees. Although, you know, in this area, it's the hobby, it's an interest, and it's good to get the honey from it. Bees have been around, as I said, for a long, long time. There have been samples of honey in the pyramids. They found Greek coins that had old bees on it. Humans realized quite early on that bees, that, you know, that the honey, the sweet, for a long time before sugarcane and sugar beet were introduced, and relatively not that long ago, honey was the source of sugars for humans. And you'll have seen photographs or videos of the how in some areas they go and cut the wild comb and things, and that's how quite precariously, and getting loads of stings at the same time. So that was how it happened in the first place, of the interest in the honey, and then over the years, methods of actually keeping the bees in hives that were easier to handle and so on have been developed. And really, up till, say, 1992, the bees could have been quite self-sufficient, but unfortunately, from that time on, this is in Britain, I should have said, because in 1992 we got the disease called Varroa came into Britain, and now if beekeepers don't keep control of the Varroa mite, the bees could die out. But there are ways of treating it, mostly by chemicals, but you can do slightly non-chemical methods and so on. But I suppose it's an indictment to humans as to just how much damage they actually cause at times. But we need them for the pollination, but nowadays bees need us as well. So we have plants, quite a few. I mean, I think the one thing I put this one in terms of here just to show it, there's a whole variety of plant, you know, what's the best plants for bees. Bees will be on most plants really, from early spring. Crocus is good. Snowdrops if it's warm enough for them to be out, and a whole range of other plants all the way through. They're good on trees as well. Willow is very good, and mixed flowers and so on. Heather is obviously the one that people know about because that's got quite a distinctive honey, and it's a lot of people rave about it. Personally, I prefer some of the other ones, but it's good. There's great talk about Manuka honey. I just think that's something that's been hyped up beyond all things, and people have done, or scientists have done analysis of heather honey and Manuka, and they can't tell the difference between it. So I think heather honey is as good, if not better, than Manuka. And just, I can't believe there's enough Manuka trees in the world for the amount of Manuka honey that's sold. For those who are interested in keeping bees, have a variety of flowers that you can actually have them, they can take. They will go wherever they want to go. If you've got loads of gardens round about you, all to the better. There's one beekeeper over in Carlacan, and she's the only beekeeper, and she does remarkably well each year because her bees haven't got any competition from other bees. So, and it's mostly garden flowers that they're on. Obviously they'll go at the heather later in the year, but the heather's only out for a short time. So you have to be aware, if you're keeping bees, you have to be aware that there's got to be some supply of other flowers or trees so that they can actually source the nectar and the pollen throughout the season. Gorse is a very good one. It's the bane because it keeps spreading, but gorse is in flower with me in January. So again, and it gives them a good start to the year. So a whole range of different things. And if those of you who are interested in bees but don't actually want to keep bees, you can do your bit by growing as many bee-friendly plants as can be done. You know, just look on the internet, you'll get information about what is the best ones for it. Sometimes it's not the big showy flowers. Cotoneaster is another one. Mine, which has got just a little insignificant flower, but at the point in time when the bees are on that, the whole bush is just alive, and you can be right beside it and almost deafened by the noise, but they're just so busy, they don't, you know, they're not coming to sting you or anything. When they're busy on a hot day or a warm day, sunny day, and they're working, they won't be bothering you at all. Okay, this is just a range of different flowers there, just and bees just to, and so really, as I say, they are fascinating to deal with them. They have their high points and low points, but normally the high point is actually particularly that bottom one with the honey side of things, you know. So right, so there's a frame that's got honey in it, but it's not at all capped that side. But if I turn it over, there's a good deal of capping. Unfortunately, I damaged this bit when I was lifting it out. So when I lifted this one out, I thought, oh, well, good, I mean, there's bits of the frame down here that hasn't got any honey in. So the amount of uncapped honey on this side would be enough for me to think, oh, I can take that frame out to get that honey out. But when I turned it over the other side and saw it was like that, I'll put this frame back into the hive so they can actually carry on working in that. And unfortunately, you can't smell it, but it does smell really nice. There's something nice about it. Here's another one, and that one's I'm happy with. There's a little bit of a gap here that's not been sealed, but I'm going to keep it at that. In fact, yeah, I'm going to keep that out of the hive there now, and I'll be able to. I tend to keep and do a few at a time. Extracting honey is quite an interesting experience. It is a messy experience, so I try to do it all about on the same day, so I'm not making too much of a mess. It's not so bad now that I'm on my own, but before, handles and things got sticky. When I had my cat, she did not like plodging across sticky floor and things. So what I tend to do is take the wax off, put it in a spinner, spin it, and then it ends up going into jars. Now, unfortunately, last year was such a poor year, I didn't actually take very much off at all, but so that's why we went into the smaller jars. That's some of last year's, and it's quite runny, that one. It just depends. The honey can be in different, you know, either runny or set. It can be lighter or darker. And one slightly darker. This one here, I can take the top off and I can turn it upside down. And now that is more or less heather honey. There's a lot of heather, large percentage of heather honey in that one. I could never sell any of my honey and say it was heather honey because I'm never sure how much other flowers are in it at the same time. But I know normally by the batch code I put on it as to when in the year I'll take it off. But that's the sort of consistency of heather honey. It's thicker, that one. So some people like it runny, some people like it set. And as I say, if we were in the one room, we could have a series of spoons and samples and just to test it and smell it and just to see what it looks like, you know. So it's got a nice run to it there in terms of that. And I'm just tempting you there. Sometimes I use the frames and just cut it out directly. Now, unfortunately, I had some visitors last week, and we actually were some young visitors, and they were just dipping their hands into this. So this originally started as a block of what was in the frame there. And you can see a little bit of it still uncapped there. Now this will be at least 3 years old, but it's still as nice and still smells as strong as anything there. Unfortunately, it's got to be a good time. They've got to be working really hard to actually make this, but it's a lot of people like it, particularly on toast and things like that. I don't particularly like eating the wax because you're left with the bits of wax in your mouth afterwards, but quite a few folk like it and so on. And that's the honey thing there. Honey is also good for other medicinal reasons. I have had people take the honey for if they suffer badly from hay fever, and the pollen, if it's local honey, the pollen is a bit like an inoculation. It's you're building up a resistance to local pollen, and so some folk prefer that than going on to chemical, onto medicines. Keeps for years. I had one friend who was thinking of sailing around the world, and so he was looking to get his sugar for the year with honey, knowing that it wasn't going to go off. He gave up his idea of going around, not because of the honey side, but I've also been asked by a district nurse, community nurse, for some honey to help with a patient who had very bad bed sores that weren't healing. And they used to be used, she could remember, she's now retired, I have to say she's now retired now, but she could remember when she first started nursing, hearing about honey being used for that. And she had this patient whose bed sore wasn't healing at all. So she consulted the doctor and he said, there's no reason why you can't try it. And I think it'd been a bad, like an abscess thing sort of in. So it packed it with honey and it made phenomenal difference to it. And it cured it. Not overnight, it took a wee while to happen, but it got there. And then even just today, when I was driving around, I was hearing on the news that some research has been done that honey is better than various of the cough mixtures that you buy for coughs and even for painkillers. I'm not sure where the painkilling bit comes in, but there's a lot of good stuff in the honey as well. So if nothing else, that's why I enjoy it there. Okay.
About the heather honey,
mm-hmm.
Is there there's no like regulation to say like what percentage of flowers they need to be, I don't know, I was going to say foraging, I guess it is a forage. Oh yeah, the range, what's the range of the bees as well?
Oh, the range, yeah, the bees will fly up to about 2 or 3 miles. Drones can fly up to about 5 or 6 if they're going off to find a queen to mate. But normally they'll stay closer to the hive than rather than go a long distance. But they will go up to about 3 miles or so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
As to, I don't know what the regulations are as to what percentage you have to have before you can classify it as heather honey. Yeah. Because I know that I would never, I mean, the only way you could do heather honey is if I don't think you could ever do it in this area, but if you say in Perthshire and that's why quite a few beekeepers take the hives off to the heather and put them up. What they'll do is they'll have them closer to home and then to grow the colony till it's big enough and strong enough, and then they'll take off whatever honey they've produced at that point and take them up and stick them in, and we're talking about huge areas.
The big moorlands, yeah.
Other than heather. Now, transporting hives is a different thing, it's not something I do very often. I prefer not to. The only time I'll do it is if I'm moving bees from one place to another, if I'm picking up a colony from somebody or other. I've said that, I've just done it this year from Locharan, but normally it's not anything I would want to do. And you wouldn't do it with a WBC because you wouldn't get your bees you wouldn't get your hive bee bee tight. It's difficult to do with that. The nationals are easier to strap together and things. Yeah. But see, even with you carrying up, because there's the heather's fairly coming out at the moment. I was seeing it as when I was around there today, and that there's that big hillside, you know, above Concra and so on. But you've still got other plants around that they'll still be going into as well.
Yeah, there's still a lot of garden area as well. Yeah, I was just thinking, well, if we've got Janice and if Alison's thinking about it, like how, in terms of the competition, can we have 3 beekeepers in the village?
I think you could do, because you've got, yeah, I think so, because you've got hillsides all the way around in terms of that. Someone's just asked a question about the drones. Yes, how do the drones know? I'm not quite sure how they do know, but they seem to go to the same, they have a sort of drones convention. So it's almost as if, I'm not quite sure whether there's a sort of a jungle drum system works out that they know when to go to it. But I haven't experienced it myself. I haven't seen it. But researchers reckon that the drones will congregate in a particular area and the queen will go to find them. There's a lot of fascinating research done with bees. We have an annual convention, I'm going to say convention, what do they call it? Maybe it's called convention, once a year for Scotland. There's one in England as well, but I've got the Scottish one, and they usually get some really interesting speakers. And I remember a few years ago in Inverness, there was a guy who was doing some research, a university type guy, but also a beekeeper himself. And what he was doing was he was shaving the top, so because the bees are quite hairy. Oh, I didn't show any of those photographs. If you see a bee, they're really quite hairy. Pollinate, I never actually said about the pollinating. They do the pollinating because they've got such hairy bodies, and as they're going from one flower to another, they're picking the pollen up and then they're brushing it into the next flower and so on. Now, he was attaching tiny little cameras almost to, or sensors, so that they could track the bees. And because the body was so hairy to get it to stick on, he had to shave the head, the bee's head. So it was quite an art. Just imagine this little bee trapped in and getting his head shaved, and then, you know, a little bit of glue on to hold this thing on. And they were following, it's how they know where these bees tend to go and what they're doing and things. But yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions that they're wanting to ask just now?
I think if you Google Skye and Lochalsh Beekeepers Association, you'll get the website there. And we've got about 75 members, in fact more than 75 there now, mostly in Skye and Lochalsh. We've got a few over in Lochcarron, we've got some in the Small Isles, and that's it. Yes, okay. I mean, there's not, I mean, it's basically the one page there at the moment. It's work in progress, but it's got folk like my own name there. That's committee members. And there's also the name, the phone numbers for swarms, which we're just about to update because there's a few, and we've got somebody over in Lochcarron. Is it Morag that's from Lochcarron, is it? Here with us tonight?
Yes, it is, but I think you remember as Kay Liston, isn't it?
Yes, Kay is, and I was just going to say Vicky Stonebridge has recently joined as well, and she's volunteering to look for or to deal with swarms. She has already had to deal with some swarms this year, so she was volunteering to be a contact for the swarms over in
right.
as well. Yeah.
Kay's had quite a few swarms of her own to deal with.
Yes.
While I'm just on, are people aware of the Advanced Beekeeper online lectures that are available just now? They've got a complete programme running throughout the summer, right, which you have to register for, and you have to pay the princely sum of £2.50. but I've missed quite a lot of them. But I was just listening to one last night, and it was very good, and it was well worth listening to.
Then the other thing is these other links are there. There's the Bee Base is a good one, and the Scottish Beekeepers Association. We as Skye and Lochalsh beekeepers are affiliated with the Scottish beekeepers, and some like myself, I'm a member of the Scottish one as well. But you don't need to become a member of Skye and Lochalsh. And normally at Skye and Lochalsh we've had apiary visits during the summer months, but obviously we've not been able to do that this year. So what we've been doing is having a monthly Zoom meeting, and I think our next one is next Tuesday, and where we just have a topic for the night to start off. Somebody talks about it, like the artificial swarms, and that was videoed, and I think that's on YouTube somewhere, which I sat and looked through before I did it myself there. And then there's general questions and things in terms of that. But that's working quite well, and it seems to be quite popular. And I think we'll carry on over the winter with it as well. The biggest problem is with Skye and Lochalsh is just the air, you know, the distances involved for traveling and things. But the one thing is that if you do become a beekeeper, is try and get to know some other beekeepers that you can pick up the phone and speak to, or ideally that you can go and share your thoughts with and experiences. And 2 pairs of eyes looking for a queen at times is all the better than one. You know, you see more than double when you have 2 people looking rather than one in terms of that. Sorry if I tended to overwhelm folk and so on.
No, it's yeah, lots of information, and really interesting. Lots of things that I hadn't even considered as well. So thank you very much for hosting this for us. I hope everyone's enjoyed it and learned maybe a few things, or reminded themselves of some things as well. And yeah, I'm sure if you do have any questions following the event, or when you maybe watch back the recording, I'm sure Audrey wouldn't mind answering them by email. Her details you could see on the website there, or you can get it by email to myself, the news at lochalshcommunityresponse.co.uk. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Audrey, and thank you very much everyone else as well.
And thank you, Karen, for organising it and dealing with it so well, with me bitting and bobbing backwards and forwards there. Yes.
Oh, I know, it's fine. I enjoy the events as well. So
good. Right.
That's great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.